We hear from some of our Republican colleagues that the world is about to come to an end because the Affordable Care Act will be implemented. The world's going to come to an end. But it is important to understand that many of these same arguments have been made in the past around the time or shortly after major pieces of legislation were passed, which today are enormously popular. Right now, we have over 50 million people who benefit from Social Security. Social Security is an enormously important and popular program in this country. But let me take you, Madam President, back to April of 1935, when Social Security was just passed. And let me quote what some of, turns out, Republicans had to say about Social Security at that time. On April 19th, 1935, Republican Congressman John Tabor said this about Social Security, and I quote, "Never in the history of the world has any measure been brought here so insidiously designed as to prevent business recovery, to enslave workers." To enslave workers was his language, and to prevent any possibility of the employers providing work for the people. Well, you go out and you ask most working people in Hawaii and in Vermont whether Social Security is, quote unquote, enslaving them. I think they would not understand what you are talking about. Because in fact, since its inception, Social Security has been enormously successful in reducing the poverty rate among seniors. But it's not only Congressman Tabor in 1935. Here's what Republican Congressman James Wadsworth told the American people. He said that Social Security, quote, opens the door and invites the entrance into the political field of a power so vast, so powerful, and to threaten the integrity of our institutions and to pull the pillars of the temple down upon the heads of our descendants. Whoa, end of quote. World is just about coming to an end in 1935 because they passed Social Security. Republican Senator Daniel Hastings in 1935 called Social Security un-American and told the American people that Social Security would, quote, end the progress of a great country and bring its people to the level of the average European, end of quote. Not quite sure what that means, but looks pretty scary. On May 6, 1935, former Republican President Herbert Hoover, former President of the United States, said this about Social Security, and I quote, "As a matter of economic security alone, we can find it in our jails. The slaves had it. Our people are not ready to be turned into a national zoo. Our citizens classified, labeled, and directed by a form of self-approved keepers," end of quote. That is a former president of the United States on Social Security. Madam President, it's not widely known, to be honest with you, I didn't know it, but in 1936, the Republicans campaigned to repeal Social Security. That year, the Republican nominee for president, Alf Landon, said that Social Security, quote, is unjust, unworkable, stupidly drafted, and wastefully financed, end quote. He called Social Security, quote, a fraud on the working man and a cruel hoax, and said we must repeal Social Security. The Republican Party is pledged to do this, end of quote. Alf Landon, Republican candidate for president. Well, turned out not quite to be the case. Turned out that Social Security will probably go down in history as maybe the most important and successful program ever passed by the United States Congress, plays an enormous role in keeping seniors out of poverty, helps people with disabilities, helps widows and orphans. It has been enormously successful and enormously popular, despite all of these cries about how it was going to destroy our nation. Maybe we should learn something from these prophets of doom. Furthermore, you have a similar situation with regarding Medicare. In a fairly dysfunctional health care system, which we currently have today, where so many people are uninsured, so many people have high copayments, so many people have high deductibles, and yet we end up spending almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of other industrialized nations, which guarantee health care to all of their people, Congress passed in 1965 Medicare. And Medicare today is a very, very popular program. And today, nearly all seniors, about 50 million of them, are receiving guaranteed health care benefits through Medicare. But when Medicare legislation was being debated in 1965, this is what the Republicans, or some of the Republicans in Washington, had to say. Remember, today, Medicare is quite a popular program, generally regarded as a successful health care program for seniors. On April 8, 1965, Republican Congressman Durrett Hall had this to say about Medicare, quote, "We cannot stand idly by now as the nation is urged to embark on an ill-conceived adventure in government medicine, the end of which no one can see and from which the patient is certain to be the ultimate sufferer." Well, I don't know where Mr. Hall is today, but I think if he were to ask the seniors throughout this country whether they are suffering from Medicare or whether they approve of Medicare, I think most of them would say that they approve of Medicare. In terms of the Medicare debate that we had on July 8, 1965, Republican Senator Millward Simpson said this about Medicare, and I quote, "This program could destroy private initiative for our aged to protect themselves with insurance against the cost of illness. Presently, over 60% of our older citizens purchase hospital and medical insurance without government assistance. This private effort would cease if government benefits were given to all older citizens." 1965, Congressman Joel Broyhill wrote, quote, "Medicare would initiate what would ultimately become a federal monopoly in regard to the financing and rendering of health care with respect to our aged, to the detriment of endeavors of the private sector. This would impair the quality of health care, retard the advancement of medical science, and displace private insurance." And in 1961, Ronald Reagan warned that, quote, "Medicare will usher in federal programs that will invade every area of freedom as we have known it in this country. If you don't speak out against Medicare, one of these days you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like in America when men were free," end of quote, Ronald Reagan. And on it goes. So the point to be made is not that the Affordable Care Act does not have its share of problems. It does. And not that it will take some work to implement it. It will. But what we have heard from Republicans in the past, whenever a major government initiative was introduced, was constant doomsday discussion about how the world would collapse.